Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining in. We've got the amazing Jeff Liu joining us for today's session as a speaker. Thank you so much, Jeff, for making out time for this event, and thank you so much, Sam, for organizing this event. So, just a brief information about Jeff. Jeff has over 20 plus years of experience in the Valley. He started from management of computer assets in a startup, which later on got acquired by Dell. And he has worked at Twitter, Google, and LinkedIn, all the amazing companies you could imagine for. We all like to watch videos of people who have worked at amazing companies, LinkedIn, Google, Turing. And if you want to understand how to get there, how to, just to know insider insights from the person who's been there and done there, then Jeff Liu is the person for that. So in today's session, demystifying DevOps, we're going to talk about a lot of things. So I'll invite Jeff Liu onto the stage so that we could converse with Jeff and take your questions and have your conversations flowing in so that you could ask your questions, your problems, or your thoughts. So just a normal conversation about DevOps and everything in general. Get pumped up, guys, because we're going to get some amazing insights from Jeff. Jeff is here with us. Hello, Jeff.
Hi, Venki. Hi, everyone.
Jeff, you want to start with the starting notes, introduction, something like whatever you feel comfortable with?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I'm very happy, super excited to be here. I think we have a much larger audience today compared with the last event. We have almost double the size, which is great. One of the goal I'm trying to achieve with the group of people here is to boost the visibility of DevOps in the engineering community of Turing, and also be able to provide a forum for us to be able to communicate. And also, most of us probably are coming from the same background. We are all excited about DevOps, infrastructure, all those different technologies. So it will be nice to actually have that kind of a connection through this forum. So super excited to be here. Let me just quickly kick off with a quick introduction by myself for people who have not known me before. So my name is Jeff Liu. I'm currently the head of infrastructure for Turing. Venki threw a lot of nice words for myself, but honestly, I think I consider myself as a DevOps engineers all the time. Even my role has changed over the years, but inside my core, I'm still a DevOps engineer. I started my career as DevOps engineer, and then probably a little bit more towards operations side. Later on, my role started slowly transitioning towards more dev side. So I took different positions, different companies before, but most of my career all around how do we build a DevOps culture, DevOps team, and DevOps technologies to be able to help us to run production systems more effectively. I worked for companies like Google, Twitter, LinkedIn, and then I also worked for some small startups. I was lucky enough to experience different growth phase for different companies. I was able to work on different projects at a different level and see how those companies adopt DevOps culture during different growing phase. So I'm very happy to be here to share my experience and also my knowledge I built up over the years with you. And I hope that can give you a little bit insights about what's happening in those companies in terms of DevOps organization, DevOps culture, technology, and also to hear directly from you as well to see what questions you might have. And then towards the end of the event, hopefully I can provide some answers for you as well. Yeah. Back to you, Wenki.
Yeah, Jeff, thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing your views. And as Jeff mentioned, and I just mentioned that last time when we had this event, as I was talking, we had to literally stop everyone from asking more questions because we're getting so many maybe. So I'm just going to put it out there. Anyone who is interested in coming on stage and having a direct conversation with Jeff and getting a chance to ask your question to Jeff about DevOps, how you can become a DevOps engineer, any other questions which you think like could add value to you, please let us know in the chat box, and I and Sam will bring you on stage so that you could actually converse with Jeff and get your questions answered. This is your chance, folks. This is your chance to get to ask to Jeff. What's your question to Jeff?
I'll just start by saying thanks, Jeff, for taking time out to, entertain us and to answer our questions in this session. I'm currently a backend engineer. I work for Andela. I've been with Andela for over 4 years. For you, you've had to play in different spaces from the startups to the well-established companies. What was it like as a DevOps engineer? So a bit of context to my question is, I'm heavily backend. I've been backend for the last 14 years, but I've been into DevOps here and there for at least 7-8 years. But I want to invest in infrastructure. I don't want to just create pipelines manually. anymore.
Mhm.
So that's what I'm trying to see. In the major enterprises, how did you implement DevOps?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you very much. That's probably the question in many people's mind. Like, what's the difference between DevOps team in the small size company versus the well-established companies? I got this question many times during my speech. So basically, DevOps is a very wide range roles. People talk about DevOps, but behind DevOps word, there's many things happening. We have an infrastructure team that can be called as DevOps. We have automation team can be called sometimes as DevOps. And then we have a production engineering or something called engineering productivity team. Sometimes it can be called DevOps in different org as well. But first of all, I want to mention that DevOps is a role that cover a very wide range. And then coming back to different companies, I think I can share some of my experience, with you. Hopefully, that can give you some insights. So I worked for two, maybe three startups in my early career. I was probably first batch of people who are actually getting more involved into the DevOps when the DevOps revolution started happening in the Silicon Valley. I started my career as a traditional operation guy. Back then, there was no DevOps, no Jenkins, there was no Chef, and there was no Agile, those kind of concepts. So all we have is a bunch of production servers. We write everything in Bash. We don't have a programming language mature enough like Python back then. So everything we have was Bash. And back then, we have a lot of Windows machines as well. So yeah, it's been so long, I already forgot about that. But yeah, back then, the tools we have is so limited. The system we have is so limited. That's the reason that people in the industry start realizing that the operations need a lot of attention. Back then, we use a lot of manpower to handle operations in production. And when the internet start booming up, where a lot of companies are moving their business into the cloud, people start realizing that we're missing so many tools. There's no way we can scale up our production service in the internet. That's also, I think, a part of the reason that Amazon got a lot of business, because it was a very well-established company back then. And then they were the first one who's seeing the business grow in the internet, because they are e-commerce business. They are doing business in the internet, and then start realizing running a production environment in the internet at that scale is very challenging. So they built a team. I would say like it's probably the very early phase of a DevOps team at them to build this automation, to build this production infrastructure, to build this environment, and also the tools systems are to be able to support that large scale. They realize the tools they develop slowly become EC2, and then they commercialize those different tools and systems and made it as a AWS. So back to your question, the challenge of a small company in DevOps is that you need to build a lot of automations to be able to meet the scale requirements. The DevOps team is going to be heavily focusing on writing automations, fully automate the release pipeline, building these CI/CD pipelines to help deliver the software faster. But when you are a well-established companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon today, they already have a very well-established systems and tools. So the challenge for them right now is not actually focusing on automation, because 90% of that challenge has been met by their internal development tools and systems. And then now today we have Kubernetes naturally solve a lot of automation problem itself. So the challenge for big company today is that how do you build a model that it can scale beyond the DevOps team? So what I mean by that, in large company like Amazon, Google, Facebook, they have like tens of thousands of engineers. And then they build hundreds of services in the company. So the DevOps team in those companies has a unique challenge, which is how do you build a system that can allow your engineering team to ship their product independently, right, without relying on your DevOps team support. So that means that you have to build a model, you have to build this automation. You can consider a company like Amazon, Facebook, and Google. In those companies, the DevOps team support hundreds of small business companies. So the challenge over there is a little bit different, because you're already solving the problem of one company, but now you have like hundreds of small business, right? In terms of the small engineering team, all of them are shipping different features and products. So how you build a tool that can serve hundreds of those kind of small business? That means you have to go beyond the tools and systems itself. You need to build a process. You need to build a way to manage it. You need to build a system that empowers the engineering team to run their own service. So you're gonna have to jump one level up to be able to meet that kind of challenge.
Sorry, I have a follow-up question. That is a quick one, I promise. So would you say a small company having an engineer like me creating pipelines is at any disadvantage to using infrastructure as code? Is there a real difference Again, this is the focus is on small company, not a large organization.
Yeah, I don't think there's a real difference. I think the ultimate goal of both approach is going to be the same. I think more or less all these companies are moving towards infrastructure as a code. But during different development phase, you probably won't be in a position to be able to do that yet. Like for small startup companies, right? If you want to start from putting everything in the code and then start going through the release pipeline without having a mature release pipeline yet, and it's going to continue, it's going to be making it worse. Unless you have a fully automated, very mature release pipeline to ship your feature products, and then incorporate your infrastructure as a code into the pipeline itself, it will be additional benefits. And I think that's the ultimate goal. But before we can get there, to do a lot of manual work. First phase, just like onboarding, right? So if your company is buying a new service today, the onboarding is always a big chunk of the work. So after that, everything can become much more smoother.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for sharing a detailed answer. I just have a question, Jeff, because you were sharing your experience, and one quote which I remember from your experience is like necessity is the mother of all inventions. When you shared that example of Amazon, it's like very important to be having some skill sets. And you mentioned that you were doing something which not many people not right. You were doing something. You were in the initial phases of DevOps in the valley. So my question to you would be, what do you think are the skill sets required for a DevOps engineer?
Yeah. Thank you very much for that question. I meant to actually talk about that with the audience, like what's going to be the future DevOps role will look like. What skill sets we need to prepare ahead of time to be able to fit the future role. So in my opinion, the industry is moving very fast in the DevOps, but I think it's pretty clear that this DevOps revolution is going to go towards automation, scalability. How do we build and manage microservice, architecture? So those kind of trend. The whole engineering, like software industry, is moving towards that area, and then it will put a lot of challenge, ahead of us for DevOps engineers, right? Ultimately, we're going to be facing a more complicated application architecture, and we're going to have to be dealing a totally different platform in the future. Kubernetes can be a good example. To summarize, a few skill sets I think is going to be very critical for future success for DevOps engineers. One is system architecture at the scalable, high throughput, highly distributed systems level. So when I talk about that, you think about the application that Google and Facebook, Netflix, Microsoft, those companies are building. So they are building a system that are not only serving 100,000 of users, they are building applications that are serving billions of users. So the system behind those API framework, the infrastructure, the platform, everything they build for those services is going to be a totally different level of a challenge. So to be able to meet those requirements, we have to know exactly how the application was designed, how this platform work, how this high throughput, system are designed. So have that kind of high level architecture knowledge is going to be super helpful in the future world for DevOps, right? Secondly, I think it's a couple of platforms we have to prepare ourselves ahead of time. Like for example, Kubernetes. I think this is going to be a very important part of the future platform. So now you're seeing a lot of companies are moving their traditional workload to Kubernetes, and Kubernetes community itself is also growing. So more or less, as part of your career in the future, you're going to have to deal with Kubernetes clusters. And then you have to have the knowledge to understand how services run. And if you were to build like release pipeline, you have to understand how you deploy the services into those the Kubernetes clusters. For example, the deployment tool Spinnaker has been getting a lot of attention recently in the last few years. Historically, we always use Jenkins all the time. And now the Spinnaker is taking charge of the deployment and the release portion of this, especially for the Kubernetes environments. So you will see more or less in the future that some system like this is going to be embedded into the release pipeline that we normally see. So get yourself a knowledge on those things will help you prepare for the future generation of the DevOps. And then lastly, from a skill sets perspective, I think that's actually what's happening in the last 10 years, maybe 20 years, in DevOps, that people are transitioning more towards the dev side of the DevOps. And today you may still see some people with a lot of traditional like operational experiences. In the next 10 years, I would say the people who work in the DevOps domain is going to be heavily leaning towards like development. So this actually kind of go back to the original story I was talking about Amazon, and also the difference between a small company and big company. So now a lot of small companies are still having the DevOps engineers team to build CI/CD pipelines manually. But later on, when this type of system tools itself, maybe for example, the infrastructure as a code is more mature, we're going to heavily reduce the manual work, the pure operational work, in that domain. So in the future, you will see people will start doing the coding much more than today. So I think writing code in Python probably able to help that much in the future as well. So I think language like Python or Ruby, maybe Go language is going to be playing a little bit more important role in the future for DevOps. Yeah. So get yourself a little bit more familiar with programming language like Python can help you build a lot of automation, especially the system integration piece. This is going to be a very critical area that we should invest time on.
Thanks so much, Jeff, for that detailed answer. And this one question, do you have a suggestion for a full stack developer who wants to learn more about scalable systems using AWS and microservices? Something like a book.
Oh, yeah. If you come from a full stack developer background, you're going to be a great fit for the future DevOps engineering team. I think the question you ask is about how do you want to learn the scalable systems. So there are many books that I read over the time. Sometimes I just forgot which book is better than the other, but I can tell you some areas that you can look into. For example, if you have not heard of a gRPC or Thrift, so you should probably spend some time learning what is a gRPC, what is a Thrift. So gRPC is the API framework used by Google, and Thrift is the API framework used by Facebook. Both frameworks are built on top of microservice architecture. So by adopting those framework, you naturally are using microservices. And then you will understand how those things are managed. For example, a scalable system, gRPC and Thrift from Facebook are beautiful scalable systems. So once you start learning those things, you will tell the difference between the traditional API framework than this framework. And then you understand what's the reason for those kind of designs to meet the scalable requirements. So I would say there's a lot of online resource, there's a lot of books they can look into, but I think the area that you want to focus on is actually learning those highly distributed systems and why the framework is designed in that way to handle the high load. In my experience, when I was learning those things, it helped me open the window to highly scalable system design.
Thanks, Jeff, for answering that question. What is your experience on Devsecops?
Yeah, so if you are coming from a security background, then DevOps is a very good area to be in these days. The reason for that, I can tell you a little bit. If you notice some very successful startup companies in the Silicon Valley in the last 10 years, you will see a lot of security companies over there, right? The reason for that is that because right now we are building a lot of applications as a cloud native applications. So once we start, the whole industry start moving towards the cloud native trend. And as we move into the new area over there, the traditional security practices, software systems, appliance are not meeting the challenge. And then all those cloud security companies are coming up to address this big gap in the cloud. This is also the reason people start raising the title of like in DevOps secure, because once you are moving your workload into the cloud native environments and you start leveraging the cloud security offerings to bridge the gap of the application and the security requirements, you will see that's where the DevOps engineers start contributing more. So DevOps security engineer, basically it's a full development cycle security practice. From the very left of the development cycle, writing code, you can start injecting your security practice over there. So the code scan can happen as soon as you start writing the first line of the code into your code base. And when you release your code, when you're checking your code, you can kick off some security vulnerability scanning and then some security policy scanning, those things at the checking time. And then in the release cycle, in the pipelines, you can start injecting a lot of similar to other tests that we have. You can start injecting security policy validation, all those different type of change. And also another big area, we talk about the influx as a code. When you start writing influx as a code, the bug inside those code is going to be directly impacting your security of your infrastructure. For example, if you write a bug in the infrastructure as a code, you basically open the hole to the public for attack. So, which is the area that is more important for DevSecOps to be able to be engaged, so we can protect our security of our infrastructure in the very early phase of the release cycle. Hopefully that gives you some answers to your question. I think this is a very critical area. I can see a lot of companies start hiring more and more DevOps engineers to be part of their DevOps engineer, because naturally there's a lot of system we do today. We cannot use traditional way to manage anymore. Everything has to be integrated into the code. Everything has to be part of the automation. So there's no way we can do typical traditional way firewall configuration.
Thanks, Jeff. How would you compare serverless setups like AWS Lambda and DynamoDB to managed setups like Kubernetes/Docker and MongoDB. Serverless looks very tempting for DevOps directions these days.
Serverless is actually a very good approach for a lot of use cases. I see many companies who's not very big, probably startups that don't have enough resources actually to run a very complicated infrastructure for them. They usually rely on the serverless or Lambda service to be able to ramp up their service very quickly. Because the top priority for startup companies is to be able to survive, to be able to deliver their features to the customers as soon as possible. So having a thin layer of their server infrastructure is going to help them reduce the overhead of supporting, maintaining, all those things. The problem with the serverless is the scale. Once you reach to a certain level of scale, and then the lack of visibility into your server infrastructure is going to be a problem. For example, if you run into any performance issues, you probably won't have performance issues when you have 100,000 users, but once you have 100 million of users, and then you probably will hit the performance issue much more often. With the serverless architecture, because you don't fully own the infrastructure, right? So all the infrastructure is maintained by the provider itself. So the ability to manage the performance is not all in your hands. Also, the functionality of serverless is somehow more or less limited. You won't be able to run a very complicated service architecture. For example, if you have 100 or maybe 200 microservices and you want to have a deeper visibility to how to control those services, how to interact between those services, it will be more challenging than serverless architecture. And also the tools, systems visibility tools around the serverless architecture will be much less than what you have on the Kubernetes side. So I think both architecture have their benefits. It depends on your user case and your scale, and how, is your company well enough to have the resource to be able to support this more complicated like Kubernetes architecture, or you are still running a very lean team, just want to push out the features. Those factors will help you make the decision.
Wow. Thanks, Jeff. I'll be taking the next question. What are the challenges you faced while working for startups and established companies? Also, is there any resource you would recommend for a learner for Kubernetes?
Yeah, so let me answer the second question first. To learn Kubernetes, Google has a very well managed documents on their website. You can sign up a Google, GCP cloud, and then start trying some features yourself. I basically learned my Kubernetes, all from the Google platform. Find the GCP Google Cloud platform, and then dive into the documentations. They have tons of information over there. And I think the first question is that the challenge for those two different type of environments. The small company, the big challenge usually is the automation piece, right? You don't have enough resource to help you to build a lot of things. So you have to write a lot of automations yourself, and then you have to find a lot of people who can carry many different hats. I still remember when I was working for a startup company, my title is a Devops Engineer. Actually, I carry many different hats. I have to write automations, manage our production infrastructure. I have to help the develop team to fix all the issues during the release pipeline, and then identify all these different challenges during the release process and help them ship the products faster. So you're going to have to deal with a lot of hand holding with the engineering team. But in a big company, the challenge will be because you are very well protected by a lot of systems and tools, and then you are building on top of those. So you are taking away a lot of low-level support work. But the challenge for you is that you have to come up with model that can support multiple teams, right? Allow them, empower them to do the work you need to do. So you have to take one step back. Think about it. Today, if I don't have to do this work myself, how do I make other people do this job easily? So you have to write some tools that help them to do the work that they used to do, and also help them build the practice, teach them how to actually run this in the DevOps. So basically, you get to spend a lot of time actually train a team, build the process, help them learn a lot of things. So those are kind of things that can be the big challenge for you work for the big companies. Yeah.
Wow. So if we're in a startup or a booming company, we will have to do the most of the work. But if you move on to an established company, then we'll have to get the work done by mentoring or showing other people how to do that. So it's more of a mentoring and teaching kind of a role, hand holding kind of a role as well, like in an established company. Is that how you can say it?
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Perfect. Thanks, Jeff. So there's one more follow-up question. Don't the major players such as GCP, Azure, and AWS handle basic DevSecOps without the need to do an extra?
Yeah, I think in the future version, like in my vision about DevOps, would be able to leverage the platform is exactly what you see today. Is exactly what the question is about, right? So I think unfortunately today, the whole DevOps practice on the platform itself is not close to mature yet. We still have a lot of things that is missing, and then all these moving parts in the cloud provider side are not streamlined yet. I think Kubernetes and the Spring kind of address some of those challenges. But overall, if you look at the entire release pipeline, development release cycle, there are still a lot of modules that are not fully integrated yet. So this is where I think the DevSecOps will be playing into. So I have been recently using Amazon and GCP. Security practice, the security offering they have over there, they do have some features over there, but they are still behind the entire industry. That's why we have so many security cloud startup companies in the last 10 years coming to the public, and then they are easily reaching the evaluation of $20 billion. They still have very strong expertise in terms of security practice compared with the cloud providers. But I see cloud providers are trying their best to catch it up. But this is a big area. I don't know if it's smaller than cloud business, but yeah, but it's a huge business that a lot of companies are trying to address.
Wow. When Jeff is mentioning about those big companies coming in, I just remembered one thing. So there is this like one person here from India. He started a cybersecurity company. His company became so big that in a city, the mayor has announced a public holiday in the name of the founder of this company. So I definitely understand these things are very huge, as you were just mentioning. So I just could relate to that.
Yeah, this is actually a very good question. When you were just saying, Venki, I had a couple other thoughts about the. So I recently actually worked on some projects for securing our production environment in the cloud. So I was exploring the features of AWS and also GCP. And the way I see the current state of the cloud providers, their infrastructure is more towards the end of the release pipeline. So basically, you have development writing code all the way push it to the production environment. The DevSecOps can actually start from very beginning of the pipeline. So when we write down the first line of the code, DevSecOps actually can start writing automations, injecting some integrations over there to be able to, start looking at the security. So they go through all the entire release pipeline. Right now, that's something that I think a lot of cloud providers are still missing, because a lot of providers are trying to build that release pipeline in the cloud offering, but they're not just there yet. So there's no way they can inject the DevSecOps practice into the rest of this pipeline. But yeah, that will be a good idea for the providers to know this is a big opportunity for them to be able to build a better service.
Wow. So we did have one more question from Joseph. I feel like serverless takes away so many preliminary steps required by containerized approaches like Docker and Kubernetes. How would the costs between serverless versus containers compare in the long run?
This is a good question. To be honest, I have not a very large infrastructure on the serverless architecture. So the one that I have worked on before was a pretty small size. I think the cost for those is still controllable, but I don't remember their pricing model. So I think if you were to run a very large systems with serverless, the cost is going to be pretty significant, because also from an architecture perspective, when you leverage serverless, you are just using that serverless function over there. There's a lot of additional features you may not be able to leverage in that platform, which means that you probably have to build something else to make it up. So in that case, it's going to be very tricky. Really depends on your environment. But I just have a high level sense that it might be a little bit more costly than you think when you actually scale this up to a certain level. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jeff, for sharing in your views. And thank you so much for honoring us with your presence and with your valuable words. Any closing comments or any valuable advice you'd want for some people maybe who joined in late in the session? Any summary of the session you would not want anyone to miss, or something along those lines? Any closing comments which you would like to share?
Yeah, I just have one probably last comment to share is that bring your friends, bring your colleagues to our session. I always believe the most successful session will be having more interactions between the speaker and the audience. And then even have been working in this industry for over like 15, 20 years, but I still learn every day from different people, different group, different like colleague. I hope that's going to be the same for this community. So the more experience we can share with each other. That'll be great. I think it's going to be successful for both of us. And as you can see, some of the questions I was able to touch today, but some areas I personally have not experienced before, so I may not be able to put a lot of insights for you. But once we grow this community to a larger community, you will have people from different experiences. We can share experience, learnings, our visions. It's going to be super, helpful for all of us.
Agreed. Thanks a ton, Jeff, for spending a valuable time with us. Thanks, Sam, for organizing this event seamlessly, and thank you so much, Jeff, for coming in here and sharing your valuable views. It was a pleasure hosting you. Thanks, everyone, Nigeria, India, and all the amazing countries you're joining in from. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.